Welcome to the Great Basin Seasonal Outlook for April through July. Over the last 30 days, we've seen warmer than normal temperatures across the western half of the Great Basin and near normal temperatures across Utah, eastern Idaho, and Wyoming. We've generally seen well below normal precipitation across most areas of the Great Basin. There are a few exceptions over parts of northern Nevada into parts of Utah that have seen near normal precipitation. Since October 1st, the beginning of the water year, you can see the southern half of the Great Basin has continued to see below normal precipitation. We have had some pockets of above normal precipitation over western and northwest Nevada, as well as eastern Nevada into western Utah. Most of this, especially across the western areas of the Great Basin, was earlier in the winter season, generally late fall, early winter. Also, pockets of eastern Idaho into Wyoming have seen near normal precipitation as well. We were concerned about some of these areas of Nevada and Utah seeing additional fine fuel growth going into this fire season because of this early season precipitation, but many of these areas have been compacted by snow, so we likely will only see low amounts of fine fuel growth. We may have to watch some of these areas in western Utah, but again, for the most part, we will see some new fine fuel growth, but right now it's not looking like it will be anything above normal at this time. Currently, our snowpack continues to dwindle due to the warmer and drier conditions we've seen over the last 30 days. Most areas of Nevada are seeing the snowpack drop below 60%. Other areas of Utah and into Wyoming and central Idaho that saw some healthier amounts of snowpack have started to dwindle below 80%. Looking at the comparison of the snowpack in April of 2021 compared to the snowpack this year, and we are definitely seeing the snowpack lower this year than what we saw last year in many areas. Some areas of the Sierra and southern areas of Utah are seeing conditions similar to what we saw going into last fire season. But again, definitely a lower snowpack, which will likely be melting off earlier than what we saw last year going into May, June, and July. Looking at our 10-hour fuel moisture, we are seeing lower fuel moistures over southern and eastern Nevada into western Utah. Similarly, with 100-hour fuel moisture at lowest across parts of Nevada and Utah as well. Still fairly healthy amounts of moisture up north where the storm track continues to push storms, bringing some periods of precipitation. And we're seeing the same trend in the 1,000-hour fuel moisture. Soil moisture remains lowest over southern and western areas of the Great Basin, but especially into California and Arizona. So again, we're still seeing lower soil moistures with drier conditions, and that will help to inhibit some of the fine fuel growth. Again, some areas of western Utah into northern Nevada and western Nevada will see some of that new fine fuel growth going into the later part of the spring. This is showing our total herbaceous fuel load, and this is an experimental model across the Great Basin. You can see some higher than normal live fuel loads over parts of northwest Utah and over small parts of western Nevada, and this is all from likely the above normal precipitation we saw earlier in the winter and late fall season. Also, this area over southern Nevada did have some fine fuel issues with loading going into last fire season, so we're likely carrying over some fuels and also some new live fuels over parts of southern Nevada. So again, some of these areas may be some targets for especially early season fires to develop as things dry out. Looking at the drought monitor, the long-term drought has improved from what we saw last year, but we're still seeing extreme to exceptional drought over southern and eastern Nevada into western Utah, with now a return to severe drought over parts of northern and western Nevada. The drought will likely persist or intensify over the next several months. Looking at our drought comparisons from March of last year on the left to March of this year on the right, you can see again significant improvements from last year across the Great Basin, especially across Nevada and Utah. We have had some drought development, however, across Idaho, despite the precipitation being near normal at times. Here are the changes just in the last month. So again, we saw major improvements from last year in many areas, but just in the last month with the drier and warmer conditions, we have seen drought redevelop and intensify over southern Nevada generally. Looking at this is just for Utah, our acreage and how it compares to drought, but this is really similar across the Great Basin. The boxes in black show the years that we've seen above normal acres burned across Utah, and again similarly it represents the Great Basin as well, and you can see that generally happens in years that we are not seeing significant drought. However, our notable higher elevation fires happen in years where we see more significant drought. So again, these are not necessarily years that we saw above normal acreage, but it still brings the concern when we have significant drought for higher elevation problematic fires to develop. So what does this mean going forward? As far as La Nina and El Nino, we've been in a state of La Nina for the last several months and last year. And looking at the forecast models, this is just showing sea surface temperature. We are expecting sea surface temperatures to gradually increase. This may push us more in a neutral state, so not La Nina or El Nino heading into the fire season, or we might stay still in some weak version of La Nina. So what has this really meant for us? These are generally the weather impacts from when we do see La Nina. And this is really what we have seen throughout the winter. And again, La Nina and El Nino mostly affect precipitation patterns going through the winter. So we typically see a polar jet stream diving south into the Tennessee Valley, and that's really what we've seen this year. We've seen wetter conditions in the Tennessee Valley, warmer and drier conditions across the southern tier of the country. We typically do see wetter conditions in the Pacific Northwest. We haven't seen those conditions really this year. That's really been about the only area that has not seen what would be considered expected conditions with La Nina. There has been some precipitation, but certainly not above normal. The 8 to 14 day outlook, taking us from April 8th to the 14th, shows warmer and drier conditions, especially for southern areas of the Great Basin, and cooler and wetter conditions for the far north. But going forward for the next 4 months, you can see as far as temperatures, the trend to generally warmer temperatures spreading north across the Great Basin going through the month of July. Precipitation still showing dry signatures over the southern half of the Great Basin. This month, we will see some storms come through mid-April, and that will bring even some light shower activity to southern areas, but we could see a drier pattern emerge later in the month. And this drier pattern will likely continue potentially throughout May and even in northern areas in June. As far as June and July are concerned, we are expecting a normal monsoon this year. Last year, the monsoon moisture was fairly robust. We had a pretty good monsoon last year, so we're not maybe expecting conditions quite as wet, but we are expecting at least a decent monsoon, especially for southern areas of the Great Basin by July. So if that is the case, we will see again that reduction in fire danger over southern areas, but still looking for more a drier and warmer signature up north, especially going into July and August. So putting everything together, we're looking for normal fire potential throughout April, which is generally low fire potential, but the increasing potential going through the month of these smaller fires popping up, 50, 100, maybe a few hundred acres as we get later in the month. So we will see activity start to pick up going through especially the latter half of April as things dry out. And then going into May, especially mid to late May, once things have had a chance to dry out for about 2 to 4 weeks, we are expecting above normal potential over southern areas of Nevada, both in the higher terrain and even some of the lower terrain. We had some of these fires pop up last year that were fairly sizable over some of the lower terrain of southern Nevada with some of the fine fuel growth last year. We'll likely see a lot of that carry over into this year with some new growth as well. However, for Utah, it's more the upper elevations that we're concerned with. Again, we are still seeing drought, maybe not quite as bad as last year, but that drought likely will be intensifying going into May and June. And then by June, we'll likely see as that snowpack melts off, assuming we see those warmer conditions later in April, those above normal temperatures, we could see a more rapid snowmelt going into May and June, so possibly some above normal potential in that month as well. And then by July, again, we are expecting the monsoon moisture to push north, so the only areas we're really concerned with in July are the higher terrain of northern Utah and also the Sierra Front. Similar to last year, we will see those drought conditions re-emerging in the Sierra as well. The only area that we have not added yet but are still looking at are parts of Idaho going into July, again with those warmer and drier conditions, and we only saw near normal snowpack throughout the season in some areas. So again, we will be watching areas of July, but that's later in the fire season towards July and August. That concludes our seasonal outlook. Check back next month for our latest updates.